Hey, what's going on, my friend? It's Jeff Newport from ChasingStrength.com. And in today's video, we are going to answer the question, are EMOM kettlebell workouts overrated? Or said differently, are EMOM kettlebell workouts overrated? EMOM, what is EMOM? Every minute on the minute. Why it's not EMOTM is beyond me. Personally, I prefer TOTM for top of the minute, or even better, even shorter and more succinctly, OTM on the minute. Regardless of what you call it, EMOM or OTM has become increasingly popular in the last decade or so. In fact, I started using it way back in 2004, which is scary to say because it's almost 20 years ago, with my weightlifting partner at the time. We train our Olympic lifts over at his workspace, which was the UNC Chapel Hill Olympic Sports Strength and Conditioning Center, where he was the assistant strength coach. That was one of the things we had in common, was our backgrounds in college strength and conditioning, as well as our backgrounds in our love affair with Olympic lifting. And so we would do that in the evenings over at his place. And then on Saturdays or Sundays, we'd come over to my studio and we train with the kettlebells. You know, we kept it actually pretty simple because we were doing so much work with the Olympic lifts and our assistants work. We just trained the kettlebell snatch, okay? And we did OTM work, 2 to 3 reps, right, on the minute for 20 to 30 minutes, about twice a week. We used like 32, 36, 40 kilo. I think he used the 32 and I used the 40. We were different weight classes. He was a weight class under me. I think I was 105 at the time and he was 94, all right? So comparable. So how'd it work? Well, it was enough, right? Twice a week. 20 to 30 minutes was enough. The results? Well, I wish I could sit here and tell you, life was amazing. It was the whipped cream on top of the sundae that I've always been looking for. And that my Olympic lifts, they skyrocketed and they took off. And it was the missing piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't. In fact, my Olympic lifts didn't change at all. That was probably because I was about 6 to 9 months before I injured my right hip pretty severely. I tore the labrum in my right hip. Okay. That's another story for another time. But I tell you what, we did notice a pretty significant increase in our stamina, or said another way, a decrease in our recovery between sets of our Olympic lifting work, right, and our assistance work. In other words, we were ready to go for the next set sooner than we used to be. So I've used the OTM concept, or the OTM method, whatever you want to call it, on or off for the last decade or so. I'd say that probably since 2013 or so, when I've been training the Olympic lifts. Okay, so every once in a while, I get a bug in me and I'll whip out the barbell and I'll train snatches and cleans and jerks. And I'll do 1 rep OTM for 10 to 25 minutes, depending on the load. But what I've noticed is that EMOM or OTM, right, whatever you want to call it, is generally abused by most people outside of the kettlebell community at large, and probably even more so outside the Strong First community. And that's because even though you're doing a set of OTM, you still need to be aware of the dominant energy system being trained. And that's important because of what occurs in the body and the outcomes you're producing. Most people using EMOM or OTM end up inverting their rest periods, right? Where their work period is longer than their rest period. For example, the classic quote unquote Tabata, right? 20 seconds of work, 10 seconds of rest, right? That's really not Tabata. That's just an inverted interval. Or they still use excessively short work to rest ratios. Like a really popular one is 30 seconds of work and 30 seconds of rest. I see that all over the place. So with either approach, the inverted or the excessively short, okay, there are some negative consequences. For example, doing so makes you accumulate fatigue quickly. Doing so decreases your force output and or power production. It also alters your technique, which in turn sets you up for an injury, or can at least set you up for an injury if you don't pick one up along the way. And I don't know if you consider this worse or not, but certainly it's up there with bad, okay? It damages your cells' functions, your ability of your cells to function correctly, because it damages the mitochondria in the long run. So too much acid that's produced goes through a process and that can kill or harm and or kill the mitochondria in your cell. And just in case you're wondering what happens if you kill or damage the mitochondria in your cell, well, if you do it too often, too frequently, you end up with this weird little thing that we all hate called death. Okay, so just giving you a heads up. And finally, believe it or not, inverting the rest periods using the wrong types of exercises, which I didn't mention before, but I'll throw that in there. Maybe we'll discuss it some other time. And or using the wrong rest periods can actually damage your heart health and function. Okay, so look, if you're going to use EMOM or OTM, let's just call it OTM, okay? Keep your work periods short or on the short side. unless you're doing what's called glycolytic glycolytic peaking. Need to get some water, mouth's getting dry. Glycolytic peaking, okay, for like a 400-meter race or a BJJ tournament or some other similar event, okay? Now, let me just make a little caveat here. This is where a mild amount of inverted or excessively short work to rest ratios can be used if you're going to use them at all, right? Glycolytic peaking. Furthermore, even if you do get these work to rest ratios right, many, if not most folks, push way too hard through indicators that their body's giving them that they should actually stop and rest a little more. The two biggest indicators that I use and that I like to have my clients and customers use are where your rep speed drops off. Okay, that means the speed of your rep actually is getting slower. That indicates CNS fatigue. Okay, and also your fast twitch fibers are checking out of the equation and your body's starting to try and grab some slow twitch fibers. And the second one is nasal breathing. And that's where you can no longer breathe nasally before your next set. And you end up mouth breathing like this with your tongue lolling outside of your mouth. Okay. And for those two reasons, that's why I'm such a big fan of autoregulation as opposed to hard and fast EMOM. Okay. Autoregulation it's essentially where your current state, right? Your current physical, mental, emotional state determines your output. For example, if you have a long, tiring day at work, maybe you got in a fight with your boss, okay, maybe work just didn't go the way you want. Well, don't expect to have a ton of energy and to hit a PR performance. Did you get a great night of sleep and maybe you're feeling relaxed? Well, chances are better than good that you're going to be able to do more work today after a great night's sleep than the last time you worked out where, you had a horrible day of work. Generally speaking, I think autoregulation is superior to OTM and EMOM work, right? For most of us over 40. And that's because it accounts for our less than optimal recuperation and recovery abilities. Okay. Autoregulation lets you train hard, but not so hard that you crush yourself like you did when you were a kid and you could get away with it. Because look, let's face it, at over 40, we can crush ourselves still, right? We still have the mental capacity to do that. However, the fallout is much larger and much longer than it was when we were 19, 20, 21, 22, right? It takes a long time to recover after crushing ourselves. And generally, we make everybody around us miserable, okay? Because we just can't function at the level that we used to when we were younger. And that's for a myriad of reasons, which we're not going to get into here. So to wrap up, let's just put some guidelines out here. If you're not going to use autoregulation and you're going to use OTM or EMOM work, okay, number one, make sure your recovery ability is high and your technique is solid, especially if you're using power exercises like the snatch, okay? Number two, start with less reps than you think you can do per minute, usually by about a half to 2/3, okay? So if you think you can do 10 reps on the minute pretty easily, prove it to yourself by starting with 5 or 6 reps on the minute and go for at least 20 minutes, okay? If you really want to know that you own it, go to 30 or 40 minutes or maybe even an hour if you have that kind of time. But generally speaking, do it for 20 minutes and do it without your rep speed dropping, okay? And being able to breathe nasally during sets and before you pick up the next set, okay? Number 3, start with a low skill or non-technical exercise first, like the swing, okay? Versus the clean and jerk, which requires way more technique than the swing. And fourth and finally, stop when your rep speed drops and or your breathing, okay, that nasal breathing is compromised, okay, just like I mentioned a few minutes ago, so that your technique doesn't get compromised and you pave the way for an injury. Hopefully you found this video helpful. And if you're looking for some resources about on-the-minute training or auto-regulated training, I'll leave 2 in the description below. The first one is going to be for a set of swing programs. Okay. And that's a combination of OTM, EMOM work. Again, I like OTM, so I'm going to call it OTM, and auto-regulated training. I'll leave that link in the description below. And if you want something a little more substantial, like clean and press work, I'll leave a link to a series of programs for clean and presses based on auto-regulation. Okay. Also in the description below. All right. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you have, go ahead and click the like button. Leave me a comment if you wish, right? Tell me what your experience has been with OTM work, EMOM work, whatever you want to call it. Good, bad, indifferent, whether you've ever used auto-regulation before, and whether or not you found this video helpful. And if you did find it really helpful, go ahead and click the subscribe button and share it across social media right, with your friends and loved ones. Okay. All right, my friend. I will talk to you next time. Until then, stay strong.